Okay, so get this. You guys sent us a case, and it's a doozy. We're going deep on John Chow.
John Chow.
Yeah, the missionary. You know the one who died trying to reach the Sentinelese?
Ah, right, the Sentinelese.
Yeah, those folks. So, for anyone listening who might not know, the Sentinelese live on, well, North Sentinel Island.
Tucked away in the Bay of Bengal. And they're pretty much famous for wanting to be left alone. I mean, they've been pushing back against outsiders for like centuries.
Centuries, yeah. And the Indian government's, well, they're not messing around, right? They've got this 3-mile exclusion zone set up around the whole island.
It's to protect the Sentinelese.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But let's be real, it's also to protect, everybody else, too.
Absolutely. Think about it. You got a group of people isolated for who knows how long, and they're incredibly vulnerable. Like diseases we wouldn't even think about could wipe them out.
It's wild, right? But okay, so back to John Chow. Even as a kid, he was obsessed with remote islands. Like, seriously, Robinson Crusoe level obsessed.
And that adventurous spirit, it got all mixed up with his really strong Christian faith. Like, he idolized guys like Jim Elliot, the missionary who was killed trying to reach another isolated tribe.
Yeah, I know Elliot.
And it's almost like that story, Elliot's story, planted this seed in John's head.
Totally. So he goes on a mission trip, right, to Mexico. He helps build an orphanage, and that's it. That just solidifies it for him, Missionary work, that's his path.
His calling.
But he's not aiming for just any mission. He wants, like, the ultimate challenge. Reaching people who've never even heard of, well, anything from the outside world,
And that's where the Joshua Project comes in.
Joshua Project.
Yeah, imagine it like a directory or something, but for unreached people groups.
Yeah.
Basically groups without, a Christian presence.
Oh, okay.
Their website, it gave John all the info on the Sentinelese.
Mm-hmm.
No written language, no Bible translations, nothing.
A blank slate.
Exactly. A blank slate.
And, well, that's when things take a bit of a turn. He gets fixated on the Sentinelese. Like, this is his mission, his personal mission, to bring Christianity to them. It's like he saw them as, I don't know, the final frontier.
And isn't it interesting how he starts looking for signs? Like confirmation that this is his destiny.
Nice.
Yeah, his Chinese heritage being on the smaller side, the island being untouched. It's classic, We humans, we look for validation for our beliefs, even when they lead us down some pretty dangerous paths.
That's for sure. And John, man, he spends years prepping for this thing. More mission trips, Bible translation training. I mean, he even goes to this missionary boot camp. They, like, simulate hostile encounters.
Talk about dedication. But here's the thing, the big question. Was he really prepared, like truly prepared to understand the Sentinelese on their terms? Or was it all about converting them?
That is the question.
What do you think?
I don't know. It's tough to say. But right before he heads to Port Blair, to set sail, he has this vision, and it's not a good one.
A vision?
Yeah, he describes this purple city, then a meteorite, and then everything just shifts to, like, white light. I mean, come on, that's got to mess you up, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
But, that vision, whether you take it literally or symbolically, it says a lot about, well, the power of belief. He might have seen it as, I don't know, a sign of danger, but also maybe of some ultimate victory. It's like sometimes even our best intentions, they can blind us to what's right in front of us.
Totally. So getting to the island, that was its own adventure. He had to find local fishermen, guys willing to take him. Imagine that. This whole foreign world, the language barrier, the risk of getting caught.
Yeah, and that reliance on the fishermen, it adds this whole other layer to the ethical side of things.
Oh, sad.
I mean, they were breaking the law, putting themselves at risk.
Mm-hmm.
And for what? Probably some money, maybe some shared faith. It shows the power imbalance, a privileged outsider relying on folks who are, well, a lot more vulnerable.
That's a good point. So they make it, right? Under the cover of darkness, they reach North Sentinel. John, he sets off in this kayak, loaded with gifts, fish, tools, trinkets, you name it. He calls out to them, sharing his love and, well, Jesus' love.
And what happens? How do they react?
It's mixed. Some of the Sentinelese, they seem curious, but others, not so much.
This is where it gets interesting, right? Because it shows that the Sentinelese, they weren't just this, like, faceless group. They were individuals with their own reactions to this strange visitor.
Exactly.
Some were probably curious, sure, but others were probably terrified and defensive. Imagine you're on this island, right? And this stranger shows up. He's speaking gibberish, offering random stuff. I mean, would you be receptive?
No way. And, well, John learns this the hard way. He gets shot with an arrow. And get this, it pierces his Bible, goes right through the book of Isaiah.
Isaiah.
Yeah. And the irony is that book, it talks about judgment and stubborn people.
Talk about a sign, right? It's almost too perfect. Like the Sentinels were sending a message, loud and clear,
Yeah.
but in a language John just, well, couldn't understand. Or, maybe he refused to understand.
Maybe. But get this, even after getting shot, John doesn't give up.
He doesn't?
Nope. He's scared, sure, but he feels this urge to keep going. Like he saw the arrow as proof that things were changing,
Right.
that he was making progress.
That confirmation bias, right? Seeing what he wants to see.
Yeah, so he tries again. Paddles to a different spot, starts mimicking their sounds, offers more gifts. And there are these little moments, these fleeting moments of connection. Like there's laughter, and this one sentinel, unarmed, approaches him. But then...
Oh, man. Those moments, they make it all the more heartbreaking. Like maybe, just maybe, if things had been different, if the approach had been different.
Yeah, but things weren't different. His kayak gets stuck. He tries to show he's not a threat. But then, the young sentinel boy, he shoots another arrow, hits John's Bible dead center. He has to swim back to the boat, and I mean, he's got to be shaken, right? Probably finally realizing the danger he's in.
I mean, that second arrow, that was a clear warning, right? Like, go away. But John, driven by his beliefs, he's still determined to push forward.
And push he does. He writes in his journal, wrestling with the risk, but ultimately he decides he's going back, reading his words, knowing what's coming. It's rough, man. It's rough.
It shows the power of faith, but also maybe a bit of self-deception. Like he acknowledges the danger, but his belief in his mission, it just overrides everything else.
It's a lot. So next morning, he strips down to his underwear, figured it'd make him less threatening, I guess, and he swims towards the island.
Wow.
Yeah. And, well, that's where we'll have to leave it for now.
This cliffhanger, it's a doozy. What was John thinking? The Sentinelese. What does this all say about, engaging with isolated cultures? We'll dive into all that when we come back.
So John's swimming to the island, right? And the fishermen, the guys who brought him, they're watching from a distance. Probably a mix of fear and, I don't know, maybe curiosity, too.
It must have been surreal for them. Like watching something unfold that they knew was wrong but couldn't stop.
Totally. And then they see it. Something that, well, that would send chills down anyone's spine.
The Sentinelese. They're dragging John's body along the beach. It's brutal. A really stark reminder of the consequences. But there's this detail that people often miss.
Oh, what's that?
They didn't just leave him there. They buried him.
Really?
Yeah. It suggests, a level of cultural complexity that we don't often acknowledge. Like, they understand death. They have rituals.
Wow, I hadn't thought about that.
Right. It challenges how we see them. We tend to view them as, simple. But there's this whole world of meaning and tradition that we're not a part of.
Makes you realize how much we don't know.
Exactly. And that lack of understanding, it played a huge role in how the world reacted to John's death. The news, it spread like wildfire. And the response, let's just say it wasn't exactly unified.
Yeah, I remember a lot of people were calling him reckless, disrespectful.
And others, they felt sympathy.
Yeah.
But still criticized his choices. It's a story that really forces you to grapple with those big ethical questions. Was he a martyr, driven by faith? Or was he reckless? Did he completely disregard the Sentinelese?
It's a tough one.
It is. And there are no easy answers. But what's interesting is how the Indian government responded. They didn't press charges.
Against the Sentinelese.
Right. I mean, it makes sense, right?
Yeah, it's not like they have our legal system.
Exactly. The government recognized that trying to apply our laws to a culture so fundamentally different, it would be pointless and unjust.
It's about respecting their sovereignty. Right?
Exactly. Their right to exist on their own terms.
The fishermen, though, the ones who took John, they didn't get off so easy. They were arrested for breaking the law, entering the restricted zone.
Right. But they were eventually released on bail.
Right.
Partly because John's family, they pleaded for leniency.
That's something else.
Yeah, it shows how this story, it impacted so many lives. And the fishermen's motives, they were probably complex. Money, faith, maybe even a sense of obligation to John. It's a tangled web.
It is. And then you have John's father, Patrick. He's been outspoken about his grief and his anger.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading some of his statements. Heartbreaking.
He blames what he calls an extreme brand of Christianity for John's death. Like, he believes that John's faith, it led him to make these, tragic choices.
That must be incredibly difficult for him. to reconcile his son's faith with the outcome.
And even with all the controversy, John's family, they've kept his Instagram account active.
They have.
Yeah, as a kind of tribute to his life, his adventures.
It's interesting, right? Because it gives you this glimpse into his world, his love for travel, for connecting with people. But it also reveals this, well, maybe a naivete, a romanticized view of the world that, well, that might have contributed to what happened.
You can't help but feel for him, looking back at those photos, knowing how it all ended.
It reminds us that this story, it's not just about ideas and debates. It's about a person, a young man who made choices with, well, devastating consequences.
Yeah, and those consequences, they're impossible to ignore, especially when you read John's final letter, the one he wrote right before his last attempt. He says, "You guys might think I'm crazy and all this, but I think it's worth it to declare Jesus to these people. This is not a pointless thing. The eternal lives of this tribe are at hand." I mean, it's powerful, but also troubling.
You can hear the conviction in his words, right?
Yeah.
But there's also this, well, this lack of awareness. Like he didn't grasp the potential harm, the harm he could cause to the very people he wanted to help.
It's hard to reconcile those two things, his intentions and the outcome.
That's the heart of it, isn't it? Good intentions, they aren't always enough. Sometimes they can even lead to harm, especially when we don't consider other perspectives.
So what does that mean for us? Like how we approach interactions with cultures that are so different from our own?
That's the million-dollar question.
Mm.
And it's one we're all still grappling with.
So where do we even go from here? John's story, it's tragic, but it also feels like, I don't know, a wake-up call or something,
It is definitely a wake-up call. And it sparked a global conversation about the ethics of contact with isolated peoples, I mean.
Contact, yeah.
Like, it makes us rethink our assumptions about progress and responsibility, protecting vulnerable cultures.
It's tricky, though,
Yeah.
right? Like, on one hand, we want to respect their isolation, but then what if there's some threat they need help with, like an environmental disaster or exploitation? Do we stand back and watch?
That's where informed consent comes in. That's the key. We can't just assume we know what's best.
Best for them, yeah.
Right. We need to find ways to communicate, understand their perspectives, and make sure that any interaction, it's consensual and beneficial.
Right.
For them, not for us. It's like, even if we think, I don't know, broccoli's good for you, we can't force you to eat it.
Exactly. It's about respecting their autonomy, right? Their way of life.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
We got to move away from this idea that we need to civilize them or modernize them. Their way of life, their beliefs, their values, they're just as valid as ours.
John's story, it also kind of brings up some stuff about missionary work, especially when it's driven by, well, a zeal that just ignores the beliefs of the people they're trying to convert.
Yeah, there's a history there, a long and, well, sometimes problematic history. Missionary work has been used for, well, colonialism, forced assimilation. We have to look at the motivations, the methods, and make sure they align with respect, consent, understanding.
And it's not just missionary work, right?
Right.
It's any interaction, scientific research, humanitarian aid, even tourism.
Oh, yeah, all of it.
We have to minimize our impact, prioritize their well-being, tread lightly.
Especially now. With social media, remote locations being more accessible, it's easier than ever for people to do what John did.
So what's the solution then? How do we move forward in a way that's ethical, responsible?
Education.
Yeah.
We need to understand the diversity of cultures, the history of colonialism, respecting those differences.
And supporting organizations that work to protect these tribes, right? Like Survival International.
Survival International, yeah, they're great. They advocate for self-determination, help those communities maintain control over their land, their resources.
But it goes beyond that, right? It's about global citizenship,
Right.
Recognizing that what we do, it has an impact everywhere.
Absolutely. Thinking critically about our choices,
Yeah.
challenging our biases,
Yeah.
Advocating for policies that prioritize respect, consent, cultural preservation.
It's a lot, but John's story, it shows us the stakes, right?
The stakes are high.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a tragedy, his story, a cautionary tale. But it's also a chance for us to reflect, to grow, to recommit, to engaging with the world in a way that's, well, more thoughtful, more compassionate.
This deep dive, it's been a lot. But hopefully it's given everyone some things to think about. Even the best intentions, they can have consequences. And understanding, respecting different cultures, it's crucial. Thanks for joining us. And if you want to explore this more, we've got some resources in the show notes.